The morning light filtered through the tall windows of room 2141 in the Rayburn House office building, casting long shadows across Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's mahogany desk. She sat hunched over a stack of budget documents, her coffee growing cold as she meticulously reviewed line items for the upcoming Judiciary Committee hearing. The familiar rhythm of Washington morning routine was suddenly shattered by her chief of staff bursting through the door without his usual knock. "Congresswoman," Marcus gasped, clutching a flash drive like it contained state secrets. His usually composed demeanor had cracked, revealing something AOC had rarely seen in her seasoned aide: genuine alarm. "You need to see this. Right now." Alexandria looked up from her papers, noting the sweat beading on Marcus' forehead despite the building's aggressive air conditioning. In 3 years of working together, she had never seen him this rattled. Not during budget battles, not during contentious hearings, not even during the most heated floor debates. "What is it?" she asked, pushing aside the budget documents that suddenly seemed trivial. Marcus didn't answer immediately. Instead, he moved to her computer, his fingers trembling slightly as he inserted the drive. "A source inside the Financial Disclosure Office contacted us an hour ago. They couldn't go through official channels, too risky for their career. But they said you'd want to see this before anyone else." The computer screen flickered to life, displaying a folder labeled simply, Justice A, Financial Records. Alexandria's heart rate quickened. She knew exactly which justice that initial represented. The first document opened a bank statement from a private wealth management firm. The numbers made her blink twice. Deposits. Large ones. Regular ones. All coinciding with dates that seemed hauntingly familiar to someone who followed Supreme Court decisions as closely as she did. "Keep scrolling," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible. Photographs appeared next. Crystal clear images of Justice Samuel Alito aboard a luxury yacht, the kind that cost more than most Americans earned in a lifetime. Another image showed him stepping off a private jet, briefcase in hand, designer luggage being unloaded behind him. The timestamp read just 3 days before a crucial environmental regulation case had been decided. "How much?" Alexandria asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. "Conservative estimate? $500,000 in gifts, services, and luxury accommodations over the past 5 years. All unreported. All from individuals and organizations with direct interests in cases before his court." Alexandria felt the familiar fire building in her chest, the same sensation she'd experienced when confronting corporate executives about climate change, when questioning bank CEOs about predatory lending. But this was different. This wasn't just about policy disagreements or partisan politics. This struck at the very foundation of American justice. She continued scrolling through the documents. Resort receipts from Martha's Vineyard. Private club memberships. Even what appeared to be personal loan forgiveness from a conservative billionaire donor. Each piece of evidence was meticulously documented, cross-referenced with dates of significant court decisions. The most damning correlation appeared in a spreadsheet that Marcus had clearly spent time organizing. A $45,000 luxury hunting trip coincided exactly with Alito's decisive vote in a case involving hunting rights on federal land. A week-long stay at an exclusive resort preceded his opinion in a case affecting the resort industry's environmental regulations. Who compiled this? Alexandria asked, her mind already racing through the implications. Multiple sources, it seems. Financial analysts, investigative journalists who couldn't publish without more verification, even some court staff who were uncomfortable with what they observed. Someone decided it was time to act. Alexandria glanced at her watch. 9:52 a.m. The Judiciary Committee hearing was scheduled to begin in just over an hour. Originally planned as a routine budget discussion, it would include testimony from Justice Alito about the Supreme Court's funding needs. The irony wasn't lost on her. Her phone buzzed. Chairman Thompson's name appeared on the screen. "Ocasio-Cortez, you ready for this morning's hearing?" Alito's been making the rounds, talking about how the court needs more resources for security and staff. "Should be straightforward." Alexandria stared at the evidence spread across her computer screen, then at Marcus, who was watching her with the intense focus of someone waiting for a decision that could change everything. "Yes, Chairman," she said slowly, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm more than ready." She ended the call and immediately began gathering the documents, organizing them in order of impact. The financial records first establish the pattern. Then the photographs make it personal and visual. Finally, the correlation analysis drive home the connection between favors received and judicial decisions rendered. "Marcus, I need you to make copies of everything. Multiple sets. And contact our media liaison, tell them to be ready for something significant, but don't give specifics yet." As Marcus hurried to execute her instructions, Alexandria sat back in her chair, feeling the weight of what she was about to unleash. She thought about her oath of office, about the people who had elected her to hold powerful institutions accountable. This wasn't about partisan advantage, this was about the integrity of American democracy itself. She pulled up Justice Alito's biography on her computer, reviewing his background, his judicial philosophy, his most significant opinions. Understanding your opponent was crucial in any confrontation, and she had no illusions about what she was walking into. Alito was brilliant, experienced, and had spent decades navigating political challenges. He wouldn't go down easily. But the evidence was overwhelming. More importantly, the American people deserved to know. They deserved to understand that their highest court, the final arbiter of justice in their democracy, might be compromised by the very corruption it was supposed to be immune from. At 10:15, Alexandria gathered her materials and headed toward the hearing room. The corridors of the Rayburn building buzzed with the usual morning activity, staffers rushing between meetings, lobbyists positioning themselves for strategic conversations, tourists trying to catch glimpses of their representatives. None of them knew they were about to witness a moment that would be remembered in history. As she walked, Alexandria's mind focused on the strategy. She couldn't simply dump all the evidence at once, that would give Alito's defenders time to regroup and deflect. She needed to build her case methodically, each piece of evidence setting up the next, each question creating a trap from which there would be no escape. The hearing room was already filling with the usual crowd. Reporters, legal scholars, advocacy group representatives, and the curious public who made democracy work by paying attention. Justice Alito sat at the witness table, reviewing his prepared remarks, looking every bit the distinguished jurist he had cultivated himself to be for decades. He had no idea what was coming. Alexandria took her seat at the committee table, arranging her materials carefully. The evidence remained hidden beneath routine budget documents, waiting for the perfect moment. She caught the eye of several colleagues, noting their relaxed demeanor. They were expecting a standard hearing about funding and administrative matters. Chairman Thompson called the hearing to order at exactly 11 a.m. The familiar rituals began: opening statements, introductions, preliminary remarks about the importance of judicial independence and adequate funding for the courts. Justice Alito began his testimony with practiced confidence, discussing security needs, staffing challenges, and technology upgrades. His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being the final word on legal matters. Several committee members asked predictable questions about budget line items and operational efficiency. Alexandria waited, patient as a predator studying its prey. She had learned long ago that timing in political confrontations was everything. Strike too early, and your target could recover. Strike too late, and the moment would pass. As the questioning moved around the table, she reviewed her opening move one final time. It had to be perfect, devastating enough to create shock, but seemingly innocent enough that Alito wouldn't immediately realize the full scope of what he was facing. When Chairman Thompson finally called her name, Alexandria looked directly at Justice Alito, noting his relaxed posture, his slight smile of anticipation for what he surely expected to be another routine exchange. "Justice Alito," she began, her voice calm and professional, "I'd like to discuss your understanding of ethical standards for members of the Supreme Court." Alito straightened slightly, perhaps sensing a shift in tone, but still appearing confident. "Of course, Congresswoman. I've always maintained the highest ethical standards throughout my career." Alexandria allowed herself the smallest smile. The trap was set. "That's interesting, Your Honor. So you would say that includes your understanding of proper disclosure requirements for gifts and benefits received from outside parties? Absolutely. The court follows all applicable ethical guidelines. Alexandria reached beneath her stack of routine documents and withdrew the first piece of evidence. The moment of truth had arrived. Including, she said, her voice cutting through the room's comfortable atmosphere like a blade, the acceptance of gifts valued at over $500,000 from individuals with direct interests in cases before your court? The room exploded into chaos. Reporters leaned forward, cameras swiveled, and committee members began talking over each other. But Alexandria kept her eyes fixed on Justice Alito's face, watching as the color drained from his cheeks and the realization of what he was facing began to dawn. The battle for the soul of American justice had begun. Justice Alito's face had transformed from confident composure to barely controlled panic in the span of 3 seconds. The comfortable authority he had wielded moments before evaporated like morning mist, replaced by the defensive posture of a man suddenly finding himself in unfamiliar territory. His hands, which had been casually resting on the witness table, now gripped the edges with white-knuckled intensity. "Congresswoman," he began, his voice carrying a slight tremor that hadn't been there during his prepared testimony, "I believe you may have been provided with information that has been taken completely out of context." "These allegations?" Alexandria interrupted smoothly, her tone remaining professionally neutral even as she felt the electric energy of the moment coursing through her. "Your Honor, I haven't made any allegations yet. I simply asked about your understanding of disclosure requirements." The distinction hit like a perfectly placed legal argument, and Alito's experience as a jurist made him recognize the trap immediately. He had responded defensively to a question that, on its surface, had been entirely reasonable. Every reporter in the room had noted his reaction, and the cameras had captured every micro-expression of discomfort. Republican committee members erupted in coordinated outrage, their voices creating a wall of sound designed to disrupt Alexandria's momentum. Congressman Bradley from Texas leaned into his microphone, his face flushed with indignation. "Mr. Chairman, this is completely inappropriate. Where are these supposed documents? What is the source of these wild accusations? This appears to be nothing more than a politically motivated ambush of a sitting Supreme Court justice." Alexandria had expected this response. She reached into her carefully organized folder and withdrew a thick manila envelope, placing it deliberately on the table where every camera could capture the moment. "I'm glad you asked about documentation, Congressman Bradley," she said, her voice cutting through the noise with surgical precision. "I have extensive financial records, photographic evidence, and correspondence that I believe the American people deserve to see." She opened the envelope with practiced calm, removing the first photograph. The image appeared on the room's large display screen, Justice Alito, unmistakably recognizable, standing on the deck of an enormous yacht, a champagne glass in his hand, laughing with several men in expensive casual wear. This photograph was taken aboard the yacht Constitutional, owned by energy executive Harrison Petroleum, during a week-long excursion to the Caribbean in July 2023. The estimated value of this trip, including transportation, accommodations, meals, and entertainment, was approximately $45,000. Alito sat frozen, staring at his own image projected for the entire room to see. That was a personal friendship. Harrison and I have known each other for years. There was nothing improper about accepting a luxury vacation from someone whose company had 3 cases pending before your court at the time. Alexandria's question sliced through his explanation like a scalpel through tissue. She displayed the next document, a detailed timeline showing the dates of Alito's trip precisely aligned with oral arguments in Harrison Petroleum versus Environmental Protection Agency, a case that would ultimately be decided in favor of the energy company by a narrow 5-4 margin, with Alito writing the majority opinion. The room had grown deadly quiet. Even the Republican defenders seemed momentarily stunned by the precise correlation of dates and decisions. Alexandria continued methodically, each piece of evidence building on the last like a prosecutor constructing an airtight case. Private jet flights valued at $180,000. Exclusive resort accommodations that cost more than most Americans' annual salaries. club memberships, hunting expeditions, and wine collections that painted a picture of systematic luxury far beyond what any government salary could support. "Justice Alito," she said, displaying a banking document that showed regular deposits into accounts linked to his financial management firm, "can you explain these monthly payments of $15,000 from Shell Harbor Investments, a firm that, according to public records, represents multiple clients with interests in cases that have appeared before your court?" Alito's composure cracked further. "Those are legitimate consulting fees for legal analysis work that I perform completely separate from my judicial duties. There is nothing in the judicial code that prevents such arrangements." "Consulting fees?" Alexandria's eyebrows raised in what appeared to be genuine surprise. "You're telling this committee that while serving as a Supreme Court justice, you've been accepting payment for legal consulting from organizations with business before your court?" The admission hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Several committee members exchanged glances of disbelief. Even some of Alito's Republican defenders looked uncomfortable with the revelation. "That's not. I mean, the work was entirely academic in nature. Theoretical legal questions, historical analysis, nothing related to current cases." Alexandria reached for another document, her movements deliberate and confident. "Your Honor, I have email correspondence between Shell Harbor's senior partners and their clients, dated just 2 days before your consulting contract was signed. Let me read a brief excerpt. Our new judicial consultant will provide invaluable insights into constitutional interpretation strategies that will significantly enhance our litigation approach." She looked up from the document directly at Alito. "Does that sound theoretical to you?" Congressman Bradley attempted another rescue. "Mr. Chairman, I object to this entire line of questioning. The source of these documents is completely unclear. How do we know they're authentic? This could be a complete fabrication designed to. The documents have been verified by 3 independent forensic accounting firms," Alexandria interrupted, producing authentication certificates from each firm. "I can provide copies of their technical analysis to any committee member who would like to review the verification process." The authenticity challenge deflated like a punctured balloon. Alexandria had anticipated every possible defense and prepared accordingly. She turned back to Alito, who appeared to be calculating his options with the same careful analysis he might apply to a complex legal precedent. "Justice Alito, let's discuss the case of Industrial Mining Corporation v. Department of Interior, decided in March 2024. You wrote the majority opinion that significantly weakened federal oversight of mining operations on public lands. Can you tell the committee about your relationship with the plaintiff's primary financial backer?" Alito's face had gone completely pale. "I don't see how personal relationships are relevant to judicial decision-making. Every case is decided on its legal merits." Alexandria displayed another photograph, Alito at what appeared to be a private dinner party, seated directly next to Marcus Industrial, CEO of the mining corporation's parent company. The setting was clearly intimate and expensive: crystal chandeliers, gold-rimmed plates, servers in formal attire. This photograph was taken at Mr. Industrial's private residence 6 weeks before oral arguments in that case. According to the catering receipts we obtained, this dinner cost approximately $8,000 per guest. You were listed as a special honored guest. She paused, allowing the weight of the evidence to settle over the room. The case was decided 5-4 in favor of Industrial Mining Corporation. Your opinion specifically cited precedents that, according to our legal analysis, had never been applied in environmental law contexts before. Precedents that, coincidentally, aligned perfectly with arguments that Mr. Industrial's company had been making in industry publications for over 2 years. Alito attempted to respond, but Alexandria wasn't finished. "But here's what I find most troubling, Your Honor." She reached for what was clearly her most damaging piece of evidence, handling it with the reverence of someone unveiling a masterpiece. "We have audio recordings of telephone conversations between you and various individuals whose organizations have had interests before your court." The room erupted again, but this time the energy was different. Republican objections seemed weaker, more desperate. Even some of Alito's staunchest defenders appeared to recognize that they were witnessing something unprecedented. "These recordings were obtained through completely legal means," Alexandria continued, as part of a federal investigation into lobbying activities that involved inadvertent capture of conversations with public officials. She activated an audio player, and Alito's voice filled the room, crystal clear and unmistakably his own. "I understand your concerns about the environmental regulations case. While I can't discuss specifics, I think you'll find that constitutional originalism provides a very strong framework for challenging federal overreach in this area." The voice on the other end responded, "That's exactly what we hope to hear, Sam. The foundation dinner next month should be quite the celebration." Alito's voice again, "Margaret knows how much I enjoy those gatherings. The discussions are always so intellectually stimulating." Alexandria stopped the recording and looked directly at the justice, whose face had gone from pale to ashen. "Justice Alito, this conversation took place 48 hours before the court heard arguments in Clean Air Alliance versus Industrial Coalition, a case involving the exact environmental regulations being discussed in this call. Would you like to explain to the American people how this conversation reflects your commitment to judicial impartiality?" For the first time in the hearing, Justice Alito appeared completely speechless. His mouth opened and closed without sound, like a fish pulled from water, gasping for oxygen that wasn't there. The silence stretched for what felt like minutes but was probably only seconds. Finally, Alito pushed back from the witness table and stood, his movements shaky and uncertain. I refuse to dignify these character assassinations with further responses. This entire proceeding is a mockery of judicial independence and, Your Honor," Alexandria's voice cut through his protest like thunder, "you are under oath before the United States Congress. Are you refusing to answer questions about your conduct as a public servant?" The question hung in the air like a sword suspended by a thread. Every person in the room understood that they were witnessing a moment of historical significance, when the facade of untouchable judicial authority met the unstoppable force of documented truth. Justice Alito stood frozen, caught between the impulse to flee and the legal reality that he remained under congressional subpoena, trapped in a web of evidence that grew tighter with every revelation. The silence that followed Alexandria's question stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Justice Alito remained standing, his body language a study in internal conflict, 1 foot positioned toward the exit, his briefcase half-gathered, yet his legal training keeping him anchored to the spot where constitutional duty demanded he remain. Chairman Thompson, clearly recognizing the historical magnitude of the moment, made no move to adjourn the hearing. The room held its collective breath as cameras captured every nuance of a Supreme Court justice caught between flight and accountability. "Justice Alito," Alexandria continued, her voice carrying the authority of someone who held all the cards and knew exactly how to play them, "you swore an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States. That oath includes a commitment to the principle that justice must not only be done, but must appear to be done. How do you reconcile that sacred promise with the evidence we've presented today?" Alito's mouth worked silently for several seconds before words finally emerged, though they carried none of his earlier confidence. "Congresswoman, you don't understand the complexities of judicial service at this level. The relationships, the social obligations, the need to maintain connections with various sectors of society to better understand the real-world implications of our decisions." Social obligations? Alexandria's tone suggested she found this explanation particularly fascinating. "Is that what you call accepting nearly $500,000 in luxury accommodations, private transportation, and financial consulting fees from individuals whose cases you ultimately decided in their favor?" She gestured toward the evidence displayed throughout the room, photographs, financial documents, audio transcripts, creating a visual mosaic of systematic ethical compromise that no amount of legal reasoning could explain away. "Your Honor, let me ask you a simple question that any American citizen would understand." Alexandria leaned forward slightly, her voice taking on the intimate tone of someone sharing a confidence. "If you were a regular citizen appearing before a judge, and you discovered the judge had accepted expensive gifts from your opponent, had dinner at their private residence, and had been paid consulting fees by their associates, would you believe the judge could render an impartial verdict in your case?" The question struck with devastating simplicity. Alito's legal mind, trained to find complex constitutional principles in the most straightforward situations, found itself confronted with an ethical standard so basic that any attempt to complicate it would only make him appear more guilty. That's a false equivalency," he stammered. "The Supreme Court operates at a different level of complexity. We deal with constitutional principles that transcend individual cases. Do they? Alexandria interrupted, reaching for a document she had kept in reserve until this crucial moment. Because I have a transcript here of your private conversation with Heritage Foundation executives, recorded 3 weeks before the religious liberty case of Sacred Heart Academy versus Department of Education. She activated another audio file, and once again Alito's voice filled the room, though this time the conversation was even more damaging. The Academy's position aligns perfectly with historical understanding of the Establishment Clause. I believe we can craft an opinion that provides exactly the precedent religious institutions need for future challenges. The response from the Heritage Foundation representative was equally clear. That's precisely what our donors hope to hear, Justice Alito. The upcoming retreat in Tuscany should provide an excellent opportunity to discuss these constitutional principles in a more relaxed setting. Alexandria stopped the recording and looked directly at Alito. Your Honor, Sacred Heart Academy won that case 5-4, with your majority opinion using language that appeared almost verbatim in Heritage Foundation policy papers published 6 months earlier. Can you explain this remarkable coincidence? Alito's composure finally shattered completely. His face flushed red, and his voice rose to a level that bordered on panic. This is unconscionable. You're taking private conversations out of context, misrepresenting scholarly discussions about constitutional theory, and turning routine social interactions into some kind of conspiracy theory. Conspiracy theory? Alexandria's eyebrows rose in apparent surprise. Your Honor, these aren't theories. These are documented facts. Financial records, photographs, audio recordings, verified by independent experts. This is evidence. She stood up from her chair, her movement drawing every eye in the room. The gesture transformed the dynamic of the hearing, making clear that she was no longer simply a questioner but a prosecutor delivering a closing argument. Justice Alito, I want to give you one final opportunity to explain to the American people how accepting hundreds of thousands of dollars in gifts, luxury accommodations, and consulting payments from individuals with direct interests in your judicial decisions serves the cause of justice. Alito looked around the room desperately, as if seeking support from colleagues who were no longer there, searching for legal precedents that didn't exist for his situation. His eyes met those of Republican committee members, but even their earlier vocal support had withered under the weight of irrefutable evidence. I have served this country with distinction for decades, he said finally, his voice carrying the hollow ring of someone reciting words he no longer believed. Every decision I have made has been based on constitutional principles and legal precedent. My personal relationships have never influenced my judicial reasoning. Alexandria reached into her folder one final time, producing a document that she handled with particular care. The room seemed to sense that this was the culmination, the final piece of evidence that would seal the case beyond any possible doubt. Justice Alito, 3 days ago, my office received this communication from a whistleblower within the Supreme Court administrative staff. She held up an official-looking document with the court seal clearly visible. It details a systematic pattern of coordination between your chambers and the offices of Justices Thomas and Barrett regarding cases involving your shared benefactors. The revelation hit the room like a thunderclap. Murmurs erupted from the gallery, reporters began typing frantically, and committee members leaned forward with expressions of shock that transcended party lines. This document indicates that the ethical compromises we've discussed today aren't isolated incidents involving just one justice, but rather part of a coordinated pattern involving at least 3 members of the court's conservative majority. Alito's face went completely white. The implication was staggering, not just personal disgrace, but the potential collapse of public confidence in the entire Supreme Court. That's impossible, he whispered, though his voice carried no conviction. I have no knowledge of any coordination. The whistleblower has provided detailed schedules showing synchronized luxury trips, shared consulting arrangements, and coordinated opinion drafting in cases where all 3 justices received benefits from interested parties. Alexandria's voice had taken on the tone of someone delivering a historic verdict. Your Honor, we're not talking about isolated lapses in judgment. We're talking about systematic corruption at the highest levels of American justice. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, Justice Alito stood completely motionless, the weight of exposure and its implications settling over him like a suffocating blanket. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "I resign my position as Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, effective immediately." The room exploded into chaos. Reporters shouted questions, committee members talked over each other, and the gallery erupted in gasps and exclamations. But Alexandria remained focused on Alito, watching as a man who had wielded enormous power just hours earlier became a figure of historical disgrace. Chairman Thompson banged his gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order, but the magnitude of what had just occurred made normal parliamentary procedures seem absurdly inadequate. Justice Alito gathered his briefcase with shaking hands, his movements those of someone in shock. As he reached the hearing room door, he turned back one final time, his eyes meeting Alexandria's across the chaos. "You have no idea what you've unleashed," he said, his voice carrying a warning that seemed to transcend personal animosity. "The court, the entire system, it's more fragile than you realize." Alexandria watched him leave, feeling not triumph but the heavy responsibility of someone who had just altered the course of American history. As the door closed behind the former justice, her phone buzzed with an urgent message from Marcus, 2 more justices requesting emergency meetings. Media demanding statements. Leadership wants immediate briefing. She looked around the hearing room, still buzzing with unprecedented activity, and realized that Justice Alito's parting words carried more truth than threat. She had indeed unleashed something enormous, the possibility of reforming American justice, but also the risk of destroying public confidence in democratic institutions entirely. Standing amid the chaos, Alexandria understood that toppling one corrupt justice was only the beginning. The real challenge would be rebuilding trust in a system that millions of Americans were about to discover had been compromised at its very foundation. The pursuit of justice, she reflected, was never simple. But it was always necessary. As reporters shouted questions and colleagues demanded explanations, Alexandria gathered her evidence and prepared for the next phase of what had become the most significant constitutional crisis in generations. The truth had been revealed, but the work of restoration was just beginning.